Blizzards tear across the mountain, swallowing everything in white. The wind bites, snow falls heavily, temperatures plunge below freezing. A group of hikers huddle together, knowing that if the storm doesn't pass soon, or if help doesn't arrive, they will die. It's a race against time. The clock is ticking. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we'll tell the incredible story of the hikers trapped on Mount Everest. Climbing Mount Everest isn't just a challenge, it is a life-altering journey. It takes months of preparation, the hiring of native Sherpas, and a mountain of equipment. But even if you do everything right, you can still die. The combination of bitter cold, high winds, brutal terrain, and thin air means that even the fittest climber, the most experienced adventurer, can simply run out of luck while scaling its 29,000 feet. Numerous people have died over the years, their frozen bodies becoming morbid landmarks along the journey. Getting up the mountain is one thing, coming down alive is another. Those who ascend Everest often have several key moments where it becomes challenging and hazardous. They're faced with a decision: keep going or play it safe and head back. Those descending don't have that choice. They need to keep pressing on before their supplies run out, which makes the descent far more hazardous than the ascent. The deadly risks, growing pollution, and the bodies frozen in place have led many to call on Nepal and China to close Mount Everest to tourists. But that's not happening anytime soon. In October 2025, the mountain was as crowded as it had ever been. During an 8-day national holiday that left millions off of work, China's citizens saw the perfect opportunity to visit the Valley of Karma. This remote area of Tibet leads to the eastern face of Everest, named Kangshung. It was the peak season for Everest tourism. Monsoon season was over, meaning some of the clearest views of the mountain. Most people come here to take in the stunning views and enjoy a peaceful escape. But there are always a few people who see the mountain as a challenge. And those people were about to walk into a nightmare. 374 climbers from 49 countries have already scaled the mountain this year, with hundreds more seeking to join them in the first week of October. But things were about to take a dramatic turn. Soon tourists began to arrive, the snow started to fall, and it didn't stop. What began as a light flurry quickly turned into an unseasonal, relentless storm. As the snow piled higher and the winds grew stronger, officials made the decision to suspend ticket sales to the Everest Scenic Area, one of China's top tourist destinations. But for hundreds, it was already too late. Across the eastern face of Everest, hundreds of climbers were already making their ascent. Several camps had been established along the route, one of them not far from the summit. But as the sky grew thick with snow, people knew that there would be no more climbing. The goal had changed, and now it was a fight to stay alive. Limited visibility is common on Everest. Even when it isn't snowing, the wind can whip up loose snow and turn the mountain into a blinding whiteout. Within moments, the group of hikers found themselves disoriented and going snowblind. Due to the intensity of the snowfall, few crews were prepared for a blizzard. They didn't have the equipment to deal with it, so there wasn't much they could do. They just had to wait it out. And in most cases, this would make sense. But the blizzard kept raging, bringing high winds and heavy snow for several days. This immediately put the hikers in danger. The cold was brutal, the wind even worse, and now the falling snow was burying the paths they needed to get down the mountain alive. Chaos would soon ensue as the snow kept falling. The flimsy tents the hikers had brought for short-term overnight shelter weren't designed for this, so they quickly started collapsing in, covering people in snow. Many were forced to dig themselves out as often as every 10 minutes. This became a constant ritual, exhausting the hikers as they found themselves in a fight to stay alive. Because on the mountain, death is never far away. Most hikers weren't on the highest part of the mountain, so the air wasn't as thin as it could be. They were also mostly still, conserving energy and oxygen. But that created a new problem. They were motionless in bitter cold, and the body can only endure that for so long. Everest climbers come prepared for extreme wind and freezing temperatures. They dress for the elements, but usually while moving and generating heat. Now trapped and unable to climb, they were at the mercy of the mountain. More than 340 people have died on Mount Everest since 1922, most of them from a combination of environmental hazards and their body giving out. More than 200 of those bodies are still on the mountain, as few are willing to risk the hazards of bringing a body down. And for the people on the mountain during this freak blizzard, it was becoming increasingly likely that they would join those ranks soon. And it was just a question of what would give out first, the blizzard or their bodies. The first major risk of being stranded in extreme conditions is frostbite. Fingers, toes, hands, feet, and parts of the face, like the ears and nose, are the most vulnerable. It can take extensive rehabilitation to recover fully from serious frostbite, and if it gets severe enough that gangrene sets in, it can cause amputations. Frostbite can be treated once a stranded climber is off the mountain, but many of them don't make it. When the body loses heat faster than it generates, hypothermia sets in. While hypothermia is most often caused by exposure to cold water, it can strike anyone stranded in freezing conditions without proper protection. Slowly, the cold breaks down the body's defenses until it simply cannot fight back. People become drowsy and find it hard to speak. They start shivering, their pulse weakens, and breathing slows down. Eventually, they lose consciousness and death usually follows, which meant that any rescue attempts were a race against time. Rescues on Everest are a common thing now, some would say far too common. So every expedition that heads up the mountain is packing radios, and they're able to get into contact with the base camp. When the blizzard started hitting hard, the people midway up the mountain were able to radio in and let people know they were trapped. Local authorities prepared a rescue team ready to move the moment the weather cleared. Until then, they could only offer one thing: advice on how to survive. But this wasn't going to be one rescue, it was going to be 6. The remote Karma Valley lay near the main base camp, where rescuers operated. The first group of stranded climbers was nearby. Their camp would be the easiest to reach. The second was about a third of the way up the mountain, near the treacherous Khumbu Icefall, a massive glacier that makes climbing perilous even in good weather. A third camp sat roughly halfway up, while the last group was trapped near the summit, more than 16,000 feet above sea level. Rescuing any one of them would have been difficult. Saving them all would be the challenge of a lifetime. Hiking expeditions and rescue missions up Everest have ended in disaster before, and the Khumbu Icefall is one of the places where things are most likely to go wrong. The unstable ice footing makes it far easier to go plummeting down the mountain, either from slipping or from ice collapse. There have been at least 44 deaths attributed to this region of the mountain over the decades, and the sunlight can turn it into a death trap. But to get people to safety, it would have to be traversed. The snowfall had begun on Friday evening and kept on growing over the weekend. Soon the call went out to hundreds of rescue workers and even local residents who went to work. The first order of business was starting to clear the snow. Mountains of the frozen precipitation were blocking the path to Everest's gateway, and even reaching the first camp along the way was challenging. The lucky tourists were the ones who saw how intense the storm was becoming and turned back, and even they faced hazardous terrain that led to injuries and exhaustion. When the snow stopped falling, the real work would begin. By Sunday morning, the true rescue mission could start. The snow had stopped, but the mountain was covered, and most of the essential paths were obscured. Many of the trapped hikers would begin clearing their immediate area themselves, but this came with several risks. Working with snow chills the body even more, something they could scarcely afford right now. And one wrong move could lead to someone falling to certain death. So it was going to come down to the professionals. Word soon reached the rescuers. The number of survivors had fallen by 1. A hiker had succumbed to a deadly combination of hypothermia and altitude sickness. They may have been more vulnerable than the others, but their death was a stark reminder of just how high the stakes were, and the rescue team would have to begin slowly working their way up the mountain, clearing the snow as they went. While the hikers were generally encouraged to stay where they were, some on the lower camps began making their way towards safety, hoping to meet the rescuers halfway. But conditions were becoming impossible. People were barely sleeping, forced to clear the snow constantly to keep their tents from collapsing and burying them alive. Some even chose to sleep outside, trading one danger for another, escaping suffocation only to face freezing to death. Clearing the snow from the area became a full-time job. Even the strongest climbers, bundled in full gear, found themselves running out of energy, a deadly prospect in conditions like these. And for the rescuers, time was running out. The rescue would have to be done in stages thanks to the remote locations of the camps. The first camp was fairly easy to reach. However, this remote region of rural China had few medical facilities. Anyone in need of serious treatment would have to be evacuated to a larger center further away. Before setting out, rescuers stocked their base camp with food, medicine, oxygen, and heating equipment, everything they'd need to pull the stranded climbers back from the brink, and then they began their ascent. The Khumbu Icefall stood between the hikers and safety, and between the rescuers and their target. This type of mountain glacier is highly unique because it actually moves, sliding several feet down the mountain every day. It's estimated that any ice entering it takes more than 4 years to reach the mountain's base, a slow, grinding movement that constantly reshapes the terrain and makes it one of the most dangerous places to cross. Even experienced climbers know they can't count on safety here, and the rescuers would have to brave it twice. Because of the speed and scale of the disaster, the rescuers weren't initially sure of just how many people they would have to rescue. And on Monday alone, they managed to bring down roughly 350 people. The majority of them were in good health, but there were still plenty of people left stuck higher up, and they were the ones in the most danger. This wasn't just tourists either. Local guides as well as yak herders and other locals had been on the mountain. The storm had taken everyone by surprise, and the end was near one way or another. There were more than 200 people still left on the mountain. The higher the camp, the harsher the conditions. While helicopters could have made the mission easier, that wasn't feasible in this weather. The winds were fierce enough to send a helicopter spinning out of control. One wrong move, and everyone on board would be lost in an instant. There was only one way out of this crisis: the slow, hard way. Each step forward was slow, cautious, and dangerous as the rescuers began their ascent, passing the first camp and the icefall. The climb grew harder. The higher they went, the thicker the snow became, and few paths had been cleared by the stranded hikers. At each camp, rescuers split up, some escorting survivors back down the mountain, others pushing higher toward the next group. But fortunately, the rescuers weren't alone. Word quickly spread through the nearby villages. Many locals knew someone trapped on the mountain. Nearly half of those stranded were locals themselves, hired as guides and porters for the climbers. Few in the valley had any way to reach those trapped on the mountain, so they did the only thing they could. They joined the search in hopes of being reunited with their loved one. With the rescue teams splitting off and escorting the survivors back to the camp, the rescue was highly efficient, with people coming down one by one throughout the entire day. Camp 1 had been rescued on the first day, and Camp 2, which was right past the icefall, would follow. Camp 3 required a steep climb, but the people here were found in good condition and could be led down for medical checks. As the day went on, some were treated for hypothermia or given oxygen, but most only needed food, water, and rest before being cleared to leave. The last leg was the hardest one. The last camp was just shy of the summit, leaving the stranded hikers so close, but so far from the ultimate victory in mountaineering. But by this time, everyone was just hoping that they would ever see the ground again. This was the most challenging part of the rescue. The air was thin and the snow cover thicker than anywhere else on the mountain. For those rescuers who were still on the quest, each step brought danger, and no one knew what would await them on the mountain. Could the highest hikers have even survived this long? It was a day full of tension as rescuers fought their way up to the final camp. They maintained contact with base camp, though the signal weakened the higher they climbed, especially with the wind howling around them. When they finally arrived, they were stunned and relieved to find that everyone at the top was still alive. Many were dealing with limited oxygen, with the first signs of hypothermia setting in, but they were able to make it out of the camp and start the long descent. The scale of the rescue mission was staggering. In total, nearly 1,000 people had been rescued from the mountain, with all but one making it off alive. The survival of the climbers is mostly owed to a heroic rescue effort, led by locals who knew the terrain well and cleared much of the avalanche debris as they marched forward step by step. But the toll of the storm spilled out far from the mountain. It was one of the most unpredictable storms to hit the region in decades, and few were ready for it. That same weekend, reports emerged of a South Korean climber who died on a nearby peak in Nepal. Across both China and Nepal, freak storms blocked roads, triggered avalanches, and stranded hundreds in remote mountain regions during what was supposed to be a mild, ideal season for exploration. Now, the future of Everest itself may be in question. The growing movement to restrict or even end commercial climbing continues to gain momentum. Environmentalists argue that it's the only way to preserve the mountain's fragile ecosystem and to allow local residents to engage with it safely for work and religious purposes. The mountain remains sacred to many Buddhists and Hindus across the region. But as long as Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, the desire for tackling the ultimate summit will persist among thrill seekers. And when they look at the nearly 1,000 people who came face to face with death in the storm of the century, they might just think, they made it out alive, so why not me? Hundreds trapped on Mount Everest faced the fight of their lives, but one child's survival was even more unbelievable. Watch how did an 11-year-old survive a plane crash and climb down a mountain. to see how they defied all the odds, or click on this video instead.